And we are back on the Zero Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Our very own executive producer, Troy Miller, is also a candidate for the West Virginia House of Delegates. And as such, and as a delegate, he went to the Democratic National Convention last week. It was no doubt an interesting trip. We haven't really talked at any length since then. But first of all, Troy, welcome back as a guest to the program.
It's always a pleasure to be here, Richard, as a guest or as your producer. And it was a, I'm looking forward to talking about this convention with you and getting your view on it too.
Well, let's start with you. What was the overall, the news coverage overall says it was joy, it was excitement, exuberance. I mean, to a certain extent, all conventions tend to be that. I mean, I went to the 2016 convention for Hillary Clinton, and as a journalist, and there was a lot of energy there too, but a lot of counter energy. So let's start with what was, you should forgive the expression, the vibe from your point of
I I won't forgive the expression because the vibes were very good. It was very energetic. This was my first convention attending in any capacity, and I was an at-large delegate with a floor pass. So I didn't make it every night. The third night, I had good reason not to attend and see Bill Clinton and Nancy Pelosi speak and all this. The other three nights I attended, though, it was clear that the energy in the room was real. The first night, the protesters that were demanding some some address on the genocide that is happening in Gaza, they disrupted the travel plans for all the delegates pretty thoroughly. And throughout that, we sat on buses for a long time, and we then eventually got off and walked for a while, and then we had to do a Secret Service checkpoint that had been partially closed down because of the protesters' actions. And I have not personally seen, the live footage of the protests or anything like this. I can say it was tremendously inconvenient as a delegate, but I also can say that there are a lot of people on those buses going, "Look, we actually fully understand what their demands are, why this protest is really necessary, if we're going to move forward and say we are a party of freedom that is fighting for the American promise for all, then it really has to be that at home and abroad." Now, I think we actually heard a fair amount of speakers make that point. Sean Fain, most notably, made the point that, if we're fighting for workers here in America and we're fighting for the freedom of working families, then we have to be doing that at home and abroad. And that does require an end to the genocide in Gaza and an end to the U.S.'s support role in that genocide. Um, Beyond that, a lot of what we heard about was largely freedom, and it was joyous. I mean, I think there was, despite any complications like that, by the time I got to the arena, it was clear that you were in a place that was a once in a lifetime place to be. Was, I believe, will be remembered as an inflection point in U.S. history and world history. And the other convention I've heard this compared most to was 2008 with the nomination of Barack Obama. I am optimistic at this point, based on everything else I heard at the convention, aside from the keynotes, that the establishment wing of the party has, at the very least, realized that they can't do anything. They can't win without the progressive wing of the party. They can't win without fully addressing economic justice issues. We can't have political freedoms without economic freedoms. We can't have freedom for all unless there is reproductive freedom secured for all. We can't have freedoms if we're fighting against oligarchs and the economic royalists who have been fighting against working people since at least the New Deal, and longer if you go back in history. It just, the oligarchy shifts over time. It's no longer slave owners, but we are dealing with a new Jim Crow. Absolutely. And what we're fighting against are people who want to take us back to a time before Social Security and Medicare, take us back to a time before the civil rights, take us back to a time before safe abortions were codified legally through, a Supreme Court ruling, which is less than ideal in any case, in that the Supreme Court really shouldn't be making law in any sense, or using their power to out of whole cloth create law. And we've seen them do that again and again, not just with the Roe decision, but also with the Citizens United decision, with the Heller decision. You can go down the line, and it's a history that includes the Dred Scott decision and the Plessy decision in this way of whole cloth interpreting law that was relatively clear in the case of, or the Lochner decision, all of these reinterpretations of the 14th Amendment. And my sense from this convention was, and certainly it is not unanimous, there's certainly wings of the party still, there are certainly people jockeying to make sure that their priorities are the highest priorities as we fight for fulfilling the American promise for all. But we are clear that we're not going back. We're not going back to those times. And as long as we put up the real fight, as long as we show solidarity, I've seen my Union Yes poster back here. As long as we are fighting together and we're fighting joyfully together, we can win. And I think, to bring it back to the nature of your question about what were the vibes like, joy is absolutely one of the things. And I think from my standpoint, I've spent many years watching these Republican conventions and Turning Point USA and all of these things. And while it's abominable what the speakers say in these venues, if you watch those events on mute, they are genuinely entertaining. They have the full pyrotechnics and smoke, and part of it is smoke and mirrors is what they have. That is, they can do smoke and mirrors and divide and conquer and pour money into states like West Virginia and other states to create the narrative that their viewpoints are popular, that their populism is authentic, which it's not. They have an inauthentic populism that is, we've seen it through movements throughout history, but it is really a populism that demands authoritarianism. It demands that if you're not on the in-group, then the populism doesn't serve you. And what we're talking about is fulfilling the real American promise that goes back to the writings of Thomas Paine, and even I'm drawing a blank on the writer's name right now, but writing about the American middle class that existed in the late 19th century, Tocqueville. Sorry, it took me a moment there. But going back to these histories and reclaiming what America had promised, and recognizing that the American promise has never been fulfilled, because we have a few original sins that we have in this country. First of all, the revolutionary radical idea within the Constitution isn't really that everybody has political rights. It's that property owners can have political rights, and that people can own property that isn't simply bequeathed by the King of England. And that is a radical revolutionary idea. Where it really goes wrong is where we start saying, and by the way, some human beings are property, and if you own more of those human beings, that you have more political rights than other people who don't own those human beings, with the 3/5 compromise, for instance. So we have, my sense from the convention is that we are really starting to reckon with these things. I mean, President Joe Biden said in no uncertain terms that trickle-down economics was a mistake, and the Democrats who embraced it over the last 40 years had made a mistake. It's not quite in the full embrace of a 21st century economic Bill of Rights, but it sure is starting towards that way. And we're being clear. We've heard the terms oligarchs. We heard it talking about monopolists and corporate interests. We heard, just short of economic royalism. And I think the door is open now for Democrats, like myself from West Virginia, who have incorporated a 21st century economic Bill of Rights into our platform as one of the central. Our platform is designed as a slide deck, but it is, I think, slide number 4. And I've talked uninterrupted for a long time, and I can continue doing this. But those are my initial impressions that I want to share with almost everyone. The fight for joyful freedom and the fight for an opportunity economy. I think that phrase is critically important because it does lay out our vision for what an economy can do for all Americans and how we need to be structuring our society and our laws and our policies to make sure that every American can participate in an opportunity in the economy and can rise to their full potential. And right now, we do not have that. I mean, if you have to lose your health insurance to take a risk on changing jobs, you do not have an opportunity economy. So I'll pause there and see because I'd love to hear your thoughts more on some of that.
Sure. Well, first of all, not to be contentious, but I actually don't like the phrase opportunity economy. It's got a Hunger Games feeling to it. I don't think the economy should work so that you get a chance to survive or do well. But I get what you're saying, and yeah, I mean, I love seeing the different perspectives on this. As you know, I'm basically a radical leftist. I'm well to the left of the leftmost wing of the Democratic Party, but but I always look at these things, Troy, with two sets of eyes. One is as the lefty radical. The other is as the guy who used to do political communications for a lot of his work. Okay, so so I look at it with that sort of professional courtesy or whatever you want to call it. On the content, I thought foreign policy wise, both the platform and the presentations were a military industrial complex. I mean, they were indistinguishable from the Republicans. It made me think of, I've been quoting lately, Frank Zappa's quote that politics is the entertainment division of the military industrial complex. On the domestic side, clear differences, I will happily acknowledge, between the Republicans and Democrats. I was surprised when I did my deep dive into the Democratic platform for this year that attacks to the right of 2020s. It was prepared under Joe Biden, but we'll see what Kamala Harris does. She's already diverged from it in a couple ways with, offering more in terms of tax breaks to first-time homeowners and enlarging the child tax credit and so on for the first year. So we'll see where she takes it. On the communication side of it, I am so accustomed to watching Democratic Party conventions and groaning and holding my head and say, Jesus, this is exactly how not to do it. I have to say, I was impressed, extremely impressed with their communications game. I would not have thought it of Kamala Harris, who did not do well in 2019 and 2020 on the communication side, but she's really studied or something. Yeah, she's connected with her inner being or something, but she's a much better speaker. I thought that the conference was really well organized, tight thematically. I mean, I'm a little queasy with the freedom theme, but they stuck with it, and everybody kind of echoed it. They let Bernie, chastise the party for letting dark money in, which I thought was good. For speakers, I thought I've got to go with the conventional wisdom here and say that I thought Michelle Obama was the most powerful of them all, had the best lines and the best delivery. I thought some of the others had good lines, but I can't help it, radical leftist or not. I like Tim Walz, and I agree with everyone else. He's just a damn likable guy, and I loved his kid. I loved his, the kids he coached. I think he is. Me, Troy. I've been howling for years, like independently of policy, even how the Democrats ought to communicate to the working class. He gets that, I think, in a way that I haven't seen anyone else do. So I think he was a brilliant choice. He and he's very happy to be the attack dog, which is the vice presidential candidate's job. Does a great job of it. And I'm curious to know, throwing it back to you, let's just stick with Tim Walz for a second. Uh, all of us coastal types or urban types think, wow, this is really going to play well with small town and rural America. But all the people saying that I've read so far aren't in small town and rural America, including me. So, what do you think from a West Virginia perspective? You think West Virginians will like the guy?
I think West Virginians will like the guy. I think he's very relatable for average people from small towns, average people who the big event every week is the football, the Friday night football games or Saturday night lights type thing. I think his demeanor resonates. I think he comes off as authentic. I think you can tell this by how the other side is trying to find every little thing they can to make him out to be a liar, and any little catch they can get him on. Oh, he said he got an accommodate or an acclamation from the Chamber of Commerce in Minnesota. Oh, it's actually the Junior Chamber of
Right.
Commerce. So that means he's a total liar and we can't trust him. They're really grasping at straws here.
Right. His
And I
wife
think
said she got an in vitro fertilization, but it wasn't really an
right. It was an
uterine
intrauterine.
transplant,
Yes,
which people
exactly.
call an in vitro. It's like, come on, guy. I feel like that stuff isn't resonating, but I
I
don't.
don't think it's resonating either. I think you
Yeah.
can see this also with after the first night when Vice President Harris was wearing a tan suit, and we heard all of that again. It's
Right.
flashbacks to just grasping at straws and spinning their wheels. And I will say, I don't think the freedom frame should make you queasy at all, because I think that's a frame that the Republicans have totally dominated for years and years and years. That they're the party of freedom, that they're the party of patriotism, that they're the party of fighting for everyone's individual freedom and all this. And I think it was very telling, and I'm not sure if everybody caught this, but during Secretary Clinton's speech, she actually basically enumerated the four freedoms that FDR had enumerated that were then the basis for the Second Economic Bill of Rights, that itself is the basis for the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights that Professor Harvey Kaye and Alan Minsky over at PDA first proposed, and has now been adopted by resolution in several states and in West Virginia as part of our platform. So I think that there is real opportunity here for us to build upon the messaging that the establishment part of the party has really gotten behind. I mean, to your point, the consistency in messaging from night to night was incredible, and especially as they built on themes. Now, to your point about the military industrial complex and it being indistinguishable from the Republican side, I think that's absolutely more or less fair, especially when you're looking at the center Republicans, the Adam Kinzinger types, right?
Right.
And that's exactly who they were appealing to in that time. A lot of those messages were not for us at that point.
Right.
Talking about the lethality of the U.S. military, I know that's not meant to resonate for me, but it does resonate for people who that is their primary concern. And I think that's a misguided primary concern, but one can understand it. When we have members of our delegation who are former armed forces in some capacity or another, and they certainly are concerned about the lethality of America's fighting force. They are concerned about us losing that sort of military edge. You and I have a different view of the world
And I
that
have to
doesn't.
say, I'm sorry to interrupt, Troy, but I have to say, that with my communications ex-professional hat on, I might very well have said, God forgive me, I might very well have said, look, you're a woman, you have to prove you're strong, you're
Correct.
not a veteran like Tammy Duckworth, or you're not a intelligence veteran like Spanberger in Virginia, and so you got to say lethal. Lethal is a
And let's be very clear. The job is commander in chief.
yeah,
That is the job she was auditioning for. And I think in that respect, she did a fantastic audition. Again, that doesn't mean I have to agree with the positions that audition requires, but we can, from a political communication standpoint, say she did a admirable job of standing strong on that. Again, as a woman, as a liberal, as we're considered doves and weak in all of this. And the reality is, to paraphrase Marianne Williamson and so many others, or I think even Dr. Martin Luther King, there is no weakness in love. Love is a strong position, and it is through strong love that we can actually achieve the aims that we're going for. But that being said, if you're appealing to what in the international relations world are considered realists, which I think is a complete misnomer for what their position is. I think it's actually more like territorialists or something like
Right,
that.
right.
Um, but those are the people who occupy that space. There just aren't that many constructivists in the national defense world. There's a self-selection bias there. But I think it was very strong to have the police chief from outside of Chicago come and, or was it, or no, it was from Flint, Michigan, come and say, crime is down and funding is up. We need that said in unequivocal terms, because whether we like the police funding being up or not, and I think it is critically important that we fully fund our police forces. I think it's critically important that we also hold them fully to account, rather than letting them continue to exist with qualified immunity and these other things that allow bad police officers who undermine people's confidence in our police forces, right? I would think law enforcement would want to make sure that there is that level of accountability so that they aren't dealing with so many bad apples, which, by the
Yeah,
way,
they
one
don't.
bad apple
They
spoils
don't.
the bunch.
Yeah, it would make sense if they would, but they don't. But yeah, I mean, and let's face it, you're not going to appeal to core or Democratic demographics, Black, Latino, lower income, working white people. You're not going to appeal to those people by saying defund the. I mean, you're just not.
No.
So I get
No,
that
and they
dimension of
want
it.
safe communities. I mean, this is the
Sure.
reality is
Yeah. Yeah.
they also don't want to be targeted so that, or to fulfill every crime quota, because it's easy to find the crime there because it's highly visible, as opposed to in the suburban developments and all this, where people are doing the same drugs and all of this, but not under the same level of scrutiny and able to do it in the privacy of their own homes that they own, right? Rather
And
than
don't have to rob anybody to pay for it, which
They,
is
well, no,
not
they
to their
rob.
credit.
You and I know this. They rob people, but it's the legalized type of robbing. It's wage theft that pays for their drugs,
Right,
for
right.
instance. It's
Or if you're a
all of the
teenager,
corporate.
yeah, if you're a teenager, it's going through your dad's wallet.
Right.
Not that I speak from personal experience or anything, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, Troy Miller. But before we go, as I mentioned, you're running for the West Virginia House of Delegates. Where can people go to maybe throw you a buck or two?
It would be greatly appreciated if anyone can go, and if you can't donate, that's fine. There will be lots of volunteer opportunities too. My website is troyforwv.com. That's TROYFORWV.com. You can also find me on all the social medias, either on Troy for WV, or my full name is Troy N. Miller. N is in Nicholas. You can find me on Twitter there, and there's so much to talk about here. There's so much to unpack, and we didn't even get to discuss the West Virginia delegation, who I believe have come back from the Chicago, having told a completely new story for the world about who West Virginia Democrats are, who we're fighting for. And that is largely because we are now rebuilding this party after Senator Joe Manchin had kind of controlled it and hollowed it out for 15, 20, 30 years. And it's an exciting time to be a West Virginia Democrat. We have a lot of work cut out for us, but the opportunities for us to win some real down ballot seats and to start to turn the tide in this state is very real. So thank you so much, Richard, for the opportunity to discuss all of this, and look forward to talking to you on the other side of the camera again.
You bet. And the West Virginia Democrats have a chance to have a big influence on the party if you win some races or show some real advances. So that the heat's on, my friend. Again, Troy Miller, thanks for coming on the program. We'll be right back. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. We depend on your support here at the Zero Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.